Hi everyone. So thanks for coming to my talk. Today I'll be talking about some work that we've been doing on learning to classify from natural language explanations. So if you think of the last 2 decades of NLP research, almost all of it has been about how statistical learning can help improve the state of natural language understanding. So the work I'm going to present today is part of a smaller body of research which actually explores the opposite question, which is whether natural language interactions can make machine learning more efficient and more human-like. So before I begin, I'd just like to mention that this is joint work with my collaborators, Igor Labutov and Tom Mitchell at Carnegie Mellon. So imagine that you want your personal mobile assistant to manage your important emails. So for example, you might want it to send you a reminder in case you haven't read an important email for several hours. So in order to do this, the agent would first need to understand what's this notion of an important email and how would it know this. So ideally you should be able to explain to the agent what an important email might look like so that it can then use this information to decide if a new email is important or not. So for example, you might say things like, emails from my mother are usually important. Such emails mention a deadline or a meeting. The subject might say urgent and so on. And in essence, this is the problem that I'm looking to talk about today. How can you learn classifiers for concepts such as important emails from natural language explanations which look like these? But before I get into the technical part of my talk, I'd like to briefly mention the motivation which fuels much of this research, which is our hope that the field of computational linguistics can actually make machine learning more effective and more human-like. So usually when we think about machine learning, at the back of our minds we are thinking about large, passively acquired collections of data. And this is with good reason. The inductive learning paradigm has been widely successful across a range of application domains. But it does have some disadvantages. Most notably, getting this kind of big data might actually be impossible for the long tail of real-world learning problems. And this is because real-world learning problems are often highly domain-specific or even individualized. So, for example, my notion of what's an important email might be different from yours. Secondly, there are inherent limitations on what can be learned from labels alone. So learning theory tells us that the number of examples you need roughly scales as the log of the size of the hypothesis space. So technically this should make even learning of common knowledge representations like ontologies impossible. But this is obviously bizarre because this is what children seem to do with relatively few examples. So the reason for this dissonance might be that machine learning has traditionally almost exclusively focused on learning from labels alone. Compared to this, when people learn, they do learn from observations, but they also learn from a blend of other strategies, including things like explanations, instructions, clarifications, and so on. In particular, if you think about human learning and pedagogy, the processes involved there are almost all intimately connected with language. So think reading books, listening to lectures, engaging in student-teacher dialogue, and so on. But there's a bigger reason why we should all care about learning from language, which is this. If computers could be taught using the language of humans, they could be way more useful than they already are. So currently, if I want a new capability on my phone, I need to wait for engineers at Google or Apple to develop it. But just imagine if people could instruct computers using the language of humans, the sorts of things that might be possible. So you might say things like, when my bus reaches close to my stop at CMU, notify me. Whenever the weather is going to be bad, let me know a day before. Or if I receive a late night email from my advisor, ring the alarm at full blast. And so what I'm getting at is that rather than have to rely on a small population of computer programmers, teaching computers using natural language could effectively make every phone user a programmer. So there are two core issues in any formulation of learning from language. And the first is basically the problem of learning to interpret, which is the basic problem of how do you get from free-form natural language text, which looks like this, to some kind of logical form or symbolic representation which computers can process and reason over. This process is usually referred to as semantic parsing. The second question is, even if you could completely parse language, what are the various mechanisms by which language can be used to operationalize learning? And this refers to the fact that even if you could get from natural language statements like these to some kind of logical forms, how do you use these logical forms to actually get to some kind of a concept model or a classifier which could tell you if a new email will be important or not? So, in my talk today, I'll partially talk about both these two aspects, but the talk is mostly going to be about two distinct ways through which language can operationalize learning. And these two ways constitute the two parts of my talk. So in the first part of my talk, I'm going to discuss some work on how natural language explanations can be a natural medium for defining expressive feature functions for learning tasks. And next, in the second part of my talk, I'm going to talk about how natural language can also specify model constraints which can directly supervise the training of machine learning models. The first part appeared as a paper at EMNLP last year, and the second part appeared at ACL earlier in July. So let me begin with the first part of my talk, which is about using natural language explanations to interactively define feature space construction for concept learning. The most successful applications of machine learning rely on a process of feature design even before any learning actually takes place. And what I'm going to argue today is that language can be a natural medium to specify such features. For example, if you think of a natural language explanation like emails from my boss are usually important, you could think of this as a kind of a binary feature function which actually evaluates to true if an email actually comes from my boss and is false otherwise. So this is going to be our strategy, that we are going to interpret explanations as these feature functions, and we will show that this process of by default feature functions which are grounded in observable attributes of the data. But actually, how do you get from explanations to these feature functions? And what we are going to show today is that furthermore, I'm going to show that we can actually learn a semantic parsing model which takes you from language to these explanations by using the pragmatics of language usage. In particular, I'm going to show that we don't need data consisting of explanations annotated with those logical forms. But how do you get from natural language explanations to feature functions? So the idea here is that we can do this through an application of semantic parsing. So for the benefit of people who might be unfamiliar with what semantic parsing is, I'll just quickly explain what it is and how it's useful for us in this case. So semantic parsing essentially refers to the ability to map natural language statements to these formal logical representations or logical forms. So statements like these may be mapped to logical forms like these. So the value of having these logical forms is that you could think of these as computer programs which you can evaluate in different sorts of context to get different types of meaningful output. So for example, the first logical form can be evaluated using the domain theory of arithmetic to actually get the value of that natural language explanation. The second logical form can be evaluated on a database of geographical facts, which could actually return to you the answer to that natural language question. And finally, the third logical form can be evaluated in context of different instances of your data, that is emails, to actually get the value of that feature for that particular email. And this part is obviously most relevant for us. So before jumping into the method, I'll just quickly give you an idea into how pragmatic context can guide semantic parsing. And this is based on the understanding that when people are describing concepts using language, their intention would be to use statements that are discriminative. For example, consider an explanation like phishing emails often mention prices. So there could be multiple possible interpretations that a semantic parsing model can associate with such a statement. So for example, one possible interpretation might be to look for the occurrences of the word prices in the body of the email. But this interpretation is unlikely to be discriminative in the sense that almost all emails, this would evaluate to false on almost all emails in my inbox. A better interpretation might be to look for instances of words related to the semantic category of money in the body of the email. And this interpretation is also likely to be more discriminative, and it's in fact the correct interpretation. And we can actually leverage this idea to jointly learn both the concept model and the semantic parsing model. So let's now delve into our problem formulation. Imagine that this table is our data matrix. In the traditional supervised setting, we are interested in learning function approximations from the space of inputs, which might be things like emails, to the space of output labels, which might say whether a particular email is important or not. In our case, what we also have are these natural language statements, which constitute the columns in this table. So if we knew to parse, we could actually evaluate those statements in particular context to actually and the values in these cells obviously denote whether a particular statement applies for a particular email or not. So if we knew how to parse, we could identify what these values are. But in our case, since we don't know the correct interpretation of these statements beforehand, these evaluation values are not directly observed but are actually latent variables in our model. So these are actually computed by semantically parsing each statement to some kind of a logical representation and then evaluating that state logical expression in context of particular instances to get the value of this evaluation variable. In particular, I'd like to highlight that in this formulation we have no annotation of logical forms for particular sentences. And the only source of supervision is only through these concept labels which say whether particular emails are important or not.
Question for you. Am I the only one who wonders why they call ponytails ponytails? Yeah, no, it's like evocative of like the horse's tail. Give me a little credit. I always want to assume that there is some kind of deeper meaning to those kinds of things, like ponytails, lipstick, tampons. Maybe sometimes a ponytail is just a ponytail and tampon is just a tampon. But speaking of ponies, settle on up, because your comments and questions are right after the intro. This week's question, I first wanted to share some comments on last week's video of why is marriage a thing? Pitman fan had this to say: my partner and I don't care to get married, which is funny because everyone in both of our families expects me to be pushing for it as a stereotypical woman. The only reason for us to want to get married would be the benefits from the government that come with it, like taxes, hospital visits, etc. Doesn't that sound fun? Our society is like, hey, you know what, you need to plan a giant wedding, and you're gonna pay a lot of money for it. It's gonna be super stressful, but hopefully memorable, and the cake should be good. And in exchange, we're gonna give you some tax breaks and hospital visits. Stephanie Wilson had a theory as to why marriage is still such a big deal. She writes, Disney. Now I think with the generation I'm in, everything is because of Disney. I wanted to call this coming out because there is so much commentary over the influence of the Disney princesses, girl finding Prince Charming, getting married, and ... Some people think that for girls especially, it's really romanticizing this idea of a heteronormative marriage where we should really spend more time teaching girls to pursue their hopes and dreams instead of a wedding ring. For this week, I wanted to go back to an old question that was asked that I just didn't have time to get around to, from a gentleman named Jose Davis, who says, why do chicks lead on? Help a brother out. First way I'm going to help you out, brother, is to maybe encourage you to rethink using chicks. I'm not saying that I find it personally demeaning. It's just kind of hokey, harsh truths, but they come from a place of love. What does the internet mean when the internet says lead on? When someone flirts with someone else and seems interested, but it turns out that they had no real intentions with that person. women, whatever gender identification box you'd like to put yourself in, has the capacity to lead on. Perhaps it seems like chicks lead on more than dudes lead on because the way that our heteronormative traditional dating society is set up, the expectation is for the guy to make the approach to a woman. Leading on absolutely happens for reasons such as they just want some company. They just want to have a good time. They genuinely like you and they like your company, but they're scared that if they make it known that their feelings for you do not match romantically your feelings for them, you're going to be really mad, leave, and complain about being friend zoned. That chick would just lead me on the whole time. Another way that I want to help you out, brother, is to encourage you to not fall into the trap of self-victimization. One thing that I have observed a lot lately, especially on the internet, is a pattern wherein guys, you don't like it when women don't want to date you. And I get it. It's frustrating. It's rejection. It's horrible, of course. But it's life. Rather than just kind of taking that more pragmatic approach to it, there is a lot of just outward vitriol being spewed at the women who don't want to date you. I realize I'm in dicey territory right now, but Jose asks, and I am answering. Chicks lead on for the same reason that dudes lead on, because ultimately they don't want to sleep with you. And that's always the answer. They just don't want to sleep with you. But that's why friendships exist, and that's why there are bajillion people on the planet. And finally, Jose, this is the kind of advice I feel like I'm giving a lot lately, but I truly believe it. Take a minute, ask yourself, and reflect on why you feel led on. If this is a pattern that is happening, chances are it has nothing to do with witchy women around you. Maybe hanging on a little too tight. And it's easy to do. I've done it. I allowed myself once to be like dragged around like what felt like the Kentucky Derby, like race course. There came a point when I realized I was not being led on. I was leading myself on. But as always, I want to hear from you. What do you think about Jose's question of
I know what you're thinking.
okay, this is what I'm talking about. This would be super weird if we weren't making this video.
Maybe you should be flattered.
Fine line between creepy and flattering, then this is it. We should talk about this. So Ben,
Yes.
would you agree that these days in particular, there is such a fine line between creepy and flattering?
Oh, yeah, an example we just had here.
Yeah.
Which was just an example. We did something called deep liking.
Yeah, I mean, it's when you go onto something, especially like Instagram, and you see that someone has liked all of your selfies, whatever it is. If it's someone you're into, you might be like, oh, that's really flattering. Thank you. If it's somebody you don't know that well, creepy.
There's other stuff that could skirt that line between creepy versus flattering in the real world.
Catcalling, for instance, you know.
Ooh, I don't know.
What?
Catcalling is pretty much just creepy, right? It'd be kind of tough to do a flattering catcall.
Yeah, I mean, I think it could be flattering. You know? Hey, pretty lady. Oh. Okay, you know what? Let's walk and talk. I think I need like I need a drink.
Yeah, let's walk.
Okay, a little weird.
What are you gonna do? Hey, Jay, what's up?
I have told you multiple times, Bolin, don't call me that.
All right, man, calm down. Just be cool.
What is up with Baby J these days?
It's so weird. He calls HR.
I can be nice with folks and agree.
Right, yeah, you're just trying to have a conversation, it'd be cool.
Exactly.
Hey Ben, how did your improv thing go last night? On your Facebook page, you were kind of nervous about it. Went okay?
Yeah, it did. Thanks for
Yeah, and I was checking out your Spotify list, and you were listening to Andy Gibb. Was that an accident? I love Andy Gibb. And you went to elementary school in Florida. I was looking at your pictures. I don't think you ever said it anywhere, but I saw in the background this picture. You're wearing like jams. It must have been like 3 or 4. Really cute, but it's obviously Florida. I can tell by the vegetation in the background.
So you can check it up on people.
Well, that's what I do. I mean, we're friends online.
Sure.
And kind of in real life too, you know. I mean, like, but we are verified friends online.
Did you look at my live journal? Were you making comments on there?
That's anonymous, right? The comments?
Yeah, but
Yeah, that
you.
wasn't-
Cool. Well, it's good to talk to you, man.
Hey, good to talk to you.
Yeah. All right, man.
I'll
So
see you online.
I guess so. Yeah. Ooh.
See you, Ben.
See ya.
Hey, folks.
So I'm noticing a little cubicle decoration.
Yeah, it's kind of sparse.
Made this for you.
Neat.
Yeah. I mean, I love stuff you should know and your work and all that stuff.
Wow,
Right?
that's
Pretty
really
cool. Pretty fun, right?
On Josh's body.
Give it up, maybe there.
I don't have any thumbtacks.
Okay, you know what? If you want to take it home, I can bring it for you tomorrow.
That'd be great.
Good to see you, Chuck.
Thanks, Connor.
What did your dad just fail?
You could just send it here
No, he's gone. So I think we're in.
too.
Oh, no.
Because hugs are.
Is this what? Are we crossing the line?
Much for having me.
Professor Cheska, thank you so much for being here.
Well studied.
What's the worst compliment you have ever received?
I've gotten a few in my day, but I would have to say probably one of the worst was someone told me that I looked like Orlando Jones. Orlando Jones is a man, funny guy, not the most attractive guy. A huge crush on me. Yeah, that's a bad one. What is the worst one you've gotten?
A YouTube commenter said that I look like Tosh.0's sister.
Similar to my bad compliment. I think a step above the sister.
Sister!
Well, I'm not really a fan of Tosh. He's not bad looking.
He's not revolting in the face. Clearly, though, I think that everyone could benefit from a little lesson from an expert.
All you have to do is follow my patented taco system.
Taco system, that's right. Never forget the taco in compliment.
Yeah, acronyms make everything easier. The T stands for to the point.
Okay.
Do not beat around the bush. Don't start talking about other unrelated things. You just want to dive right in there and get to the point.
Mm-hmm.
The A stands for actually compliment. Oh, that's good. Yeah, I hate non-complimentary compliment. I think a lot of times people get tripped up and they say something that's kind of negative and they try to wrap it up in a smile.
Or they just make an observation, like, you have glasses on. Look at those.
See?
Mhm.
Creepy.
Huh?
Not.
Oh.
Don't be creepy. Don't like lick your lips while you're doing it.
Just
or
don't lick your lips in public.
O stands for honest. That
Honest.
sounds like an O, but it's
Nice phonetic. Well, I am so glad that you are teaching everybody the taco system because compliments that are delivered well really have positive effects on people. There's actually this 2012 study that came out of Japan, okay? Employees at a business who were just delivered compliments about their performance. They felt like they had gotten a bonus, like a capitally integrate the taco system into their lives. Should we do a little role play?
yeah. I think that's actually you. I gave you a compliment.
A taco.
You know, it reminds me of this shirt that I had like in elementary school, and I had such a tough time back then. I was really fit on, but I just never.
So
Yeah,
did you like the shirt? Were you?
Oh, your shirts.
Yeah.
Yes, it's really cute. It's really cute.
Thank you.
Yeah, it brings back memories. Not the way to do it.
Now A is important and a little tricky. You gotta make your compliment actually a compliment. You and I both have brown eyes.
We do both have brown eyes. I'm not sure why you told me that, but okay.
Something we have in common.
So that was more of an observation
That's just an observation.
and not a compliment. You're definitely missing like an adjective in there.
Try to emphasize. You have dazzling eyes.
Oh,
Dazzling.
that's one you don't hear every single day.
I know.
So then creepy. You want to stay away from creepy gestures like this is a really creepy.
No compliment sharing. I know you just touch, you know.
Yeah.
I do an arm rub, like a forearm rub.
That's definitely advanced tacoing.
Maybe a few days in.
Yeah.
You can get to some advanced tacoing, but
Exactly.
you want to start out with taco 101.
And then when it comes to honest, it's important to be honest.
Yeah.
But again, you want to be careful and not step into that like backhanded compliment. I would never think to wear something like that at your size. That's not a compliment.
I feel like this one is tricky too. Oh, you've lost so much weight. That's the toughest one. It's coming from like a really good place and you want to commend them if they've been trying to lose weight. But then for the person receiving that,
That's a really weird one. I personally try to stay away from the weight compliments at
Yeah.
all because something dressed out looks different. And
yeah, you finally fixed the chair.
You know it.
So I wanted some 21st century insight on the role of chivalry in modern dating. And what better person for this damsel in distress to talk to than her resident knight in shining armor?
Hello.
Thank you, first of all, so much for
Thank
coming
you.
here.
Thank you for having me.
Does your horse need any carrots?
Oh, he's good.
What did you feed it?
Hey.
Hey,
Very good.
first question that I have for you, since you are my resident knight in shining armor, and I want to get some insight from the male mind on chivalry in modern dating, please enlighten me and our viewers on what chivalry is exactly.
Chivalry, according to Webster's dictionary, is the sum of the ideal qualifications of a knight, including courtesy, generosity, valor, and dexterity in arms.
Okay, so 21st century knight though, break it down for me. Do you guys think about chivalry these days?
I think chivalrous has been replaced by courteous,
Could you offer an example?
opening up doors for ladies.
But I know that some guys get nervous about, say, opening a door for a woman because sometimes women assume that by opening a door or being courteous based on the fact that they are female is a sign that maybe a guy thinks that women can't open doors for themselves or are weaker.
Really, I should be doing this for you. And you can't do it on your own.
Your sign of chivalry is to say something a little bit bigger, like picking up the check, especially in like a first date situation. Is it chivalrous?
Absolutely. Every guys should do that.
Have you ever had a rumor about me for being chivalrous? You're just 100%.
Always you go.
Wow.
Yep.
Home runs.
Yeah, every time, knocking it out of the park.
Good for you.
Yeah.
Resident Knight.
Do you think chivalrous goes both ways? Do you think women can be chivalrous towards men?
Well, by evidence of me wearing a suit of arms, I'm going to go ahead and say the answer is yes. This whole debate over modern chivalry in relationships, especially as it pertains to men and how they act toward women, I think the problem that we encounter is the fact that it's an outdated term. Because it's not so much chivalry, it's that word that you brought up earlier, courtesy. It's simply another word for courtesy or respect. So can women be chivalrous? I hope so. I would like to be respectful and courteous to a man that I am dating and I love, and I want to show him the same kind of courtesy that he would show to me. Maybe in different ways.
So what's an example of a woman being chivalrous towards a man?
Being barefoot and pregnant. Just kidding.
No.
I'm kidding. Not necessarily opening the door. Not, as I've seen on some websites, woman buying a man flowers. Different kind of communication. But picking up the tab every now and then, making food, just going out of your way to make that person's life easier.
Would it be courteous for a woman to go for a man?
Absolutely. Social convention would say it's more of a man's job to do that. But if I'm going into work and there's a dude behind me, will I hold the door for him? Totally. Because
Or
I'm
would you
always a
hustle up to open the